In 2015, after Russia occupied Crimea and certain territories in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, Putin declared that Western sanctions would revitalize and strengthen the Russian economy. 10 years later, it has become clear that international isolation and restrictions have led to a systemic crisis in the country. National import substitution programs have failed, and export sanctions are limiting the ability to fill the federal budget. How have sanctions affected the economy of the aggressor country in 2025? Let's break it down now. The first in 2025, but already the 16th since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the EU sanctions package was introduced on February 24th. At that time, 74 tankers from Russia's Shadow Fleet were targeted, as well as 83 individuals and legal entities. The EU tightened export restrictions on dual-use goods, and for a number of Russian banks, it imposed stricter financial and crypto restrictions. The list of sanctioned propaganda media outlets also grew. After that, the pressure only increased. Kyiv's partners consistently restricted Russian imports and exports, disconnected the aggressor country's banks from international payment systems, and targeted the logistics that underpin Russia's so-called wartime economy. European countries unanimously supported a complete ban on the import of Russian LNG and LPG.
The beginning of a new era, an era of complete energy independence for Europe from Russia. Many believe this is impossible, but the numbers speak for themselves, and I'll give you a few of them. Today, imports of Russian gas, both LNG and pipeline gas, have dropped from 45% at the start of the war to 13%. Coal imports have fallen from 51% at the start of the war to 0. Imports of crude oil have dropped from 26% to 2% as of today.
The sanctions imposed by the United States have been especially painful for Russia. On October 22nd, the U.S. Treasury imposed restrictions on Russian oil giants, Rosneft, Lukoil, and their subsidiaries. Fearing American sanctions, India and China, the main buyers of Russian fuel, have started to cut back on their purchases. According to Bloomberg, even the huge discounts offered by Moscow are no longer working. The largest buyer of Russian oil, not just in India, but in the world, Reliance Industries conglomerate, has refused deliveries of 500,000 barrels per day and shifted its imports to Middle Eastern countries.
The largest Indian buyers are already cutting back, and some have even stopped purchasing Russian energy resources out of fear of being targeted by American and European sanctions. Most Chinese companies are also already reducing their purchases of Russian oil, again, and gas as well, out of fear of being targeted by these sanctions. The value of Russian assets, both in energy and other sectors, has plummeted sharply, even after just the announcements alone from the U.S. administration to impose these sanctions.
The Kremlin is selling raw materials for next to nothing, just to keep the flow going. In early December 2025, Moscow sent 38 tankers to sea in a single week. This is an absolute record since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But selling these barrels is extremely difficult. The volume of Russian oil stuck in transit is rapidly increasing. Tankers are drifting without unloading, while Moscow frantically searches for daredevils willing to take its raw materials, even at a huge discount, but also with the risk of falling under American and European sanctions.
As of today, Rosneft has committed to pay 11 trillion rubles to the state budget of the Russian Federation. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, this figure currently stands at 8 trillion rubles, and Rosneft will close this year at around 8.2 trillion rubles. This is the amount transferred to the budget of the Russian Federation.
Failure to fulfill obligations to fill the federal treasury means that there can be no talk of growth rates close to the global ones that Prime Minister Mishustin mentioned. By the end of 2025, more than half of Russian regions ended up with budget deficits, and the federal treasury's deficit reached record levels. Production of food products in the country is declining. The last time the food industry saw such a downturn was almost 20 years ago. Russian citizens are basically being offered only one way to earn money: to go to war against Ukraine.
The impoverishment of the population and the hopelessness of the provinces are a major resource for war. Putin is taking full advantage of this. And he understands the benefit of people not being able to make a living in small towns. It means they can be lured in with this war contract, for example. And as long as Putin is in power, naturally, Russia will continue to degrade and fall apart, Moscow included. It'll keep draining the last resources and lifeblood from the rest of the country, siphoning them off.
The 2025 tax reform is an attempt to patch holes in the federal budget at the expense of the population. Starting January 1st, 2026, the value-added tax in Russia will increase from 20% to 22%. Such an increase in the base VAT rate will inevitably lead to higher prices and a new round of inflation. The situation in the economy is so critical that the head of the Kremlin had to, albeit in the most veiled way possible, admit the obvious. This year, the growth rate of Russia's economy has gone through the expected slowdown phase. Along with the reduction in inflation, GDP growth rates have also declined. By the end of the year, they will amount to about 1%. The head of the Russian government promised to fix the situation as early as 2026 by increasing the production of domestic goods. For example, over the next 6 years, 90% of medications in state hospitals must be exclusively of Russian origin. This is required by the state strategy for the development of healthcare in Russia, which was approved by Putin. According to experts, this attempted import substitution will end in the same failure as the previous one. For instance, in aviation. In the coming years, Russian airlines may be left without foreign aircraft. Due to the lack of maintenance and the inability to purchase original spare parts, dozens of planes have already been taken out of service. Replacing them with domestic aircraft is an almost impossible task. The plan to produce Russian airplanes is constantly falling through, supply chains are disrupted, and components are unavailable. So, flying with Russian airlines is dangerous. According to the agency's publication, the number of fatalities in commercial aviation accidents in Russia since the beginning of 2025 has already exceeded the total number of victims over the previous 2 years.
There are no spare parts here. All gray imports arrive via parallel channels, very expensive. Spare parts are precious. All of this gets passed on to ordinary people, which is why fares and prices for air travel are skyrocketing. And where all the money is, nobody knows, because the authorities simply don't have any money. There's nothing to help with. Basically, everyone is left begging for help.
Even though the Kremlin has slashed everything it could, from social programs to regional budgets, Russia's military-industrial complex is still drowning. The insider's analysis shows that the defense industry is critically dependent on imported chemical components and equipment. Without foreign additives, Russia can't produce aviation or rocket fuel, resins for detonators, or fibers for bulletproof vests. Import substitution exists only on paper. In reality, the Russian military industry relies on gray market supplies from China, India, and Iran, who even resell products from Western companies. Moscow is looking for any possible workarounds to get parts for drones and missiles. The bottom line, the year 2025 brought Russia neither victory nor prosperity. But Putin is still willing to send tens of thousands of his fellow citizens to their deaths and doom millions to poverty just to continue his bloody war.